Eleanor had become very good at being invisible. It was, she had discovered, less a talent than a discipline, a daily practice of smallness, of occupying exactly as much space as was expected and not 1 inch more. She kept her eyes down. She kept her voice low. She kept her hands, always, gloved. The gloves were the most important thing. They were plain cotton, serviceable, the kind that a dozen other women in Ashworth House wore without a second thought. No one looked at a housemaid's gloves. No one looked at a housemaid at all, which was precisely the point, which was precisely why she had become one. She had been Eleanor Voss for 3 years. Wife, widow, and now, by the particular mercy of desperation, invisible. She had been Eleanor Hartley before that, the daughter of a respectable family, educated, presented, briefly hopeful in the way that girls are briefly hopeful before the world explains itself to them. She had danced at 3 seasons' worth of balls. She had been called pretty by people who meant it and accomplished by people who meant something else. She had married Frederick Voss at 25 in a church full of flowers and people she trusted, and she had believed, standing there in the white dress with the morning light coming through the high windows, that she understood what her life was going to be. She had been wrong about that. She had been wrong about Frederick, too, not entirely, not in the ways that mattered most, but in the ways that turned out to matter anyway. He had been kind to her. She held on to that. In the accounting of a marriage that had ended badly, through no fault she could entirely name, she held on to the kindness like a ledger entry that wouldn't balance but couldn't be discarded. He had been kind, and he had been keeping secrets, and the secrets had outlived him by 6 months and were currently trying to outlive her. Hence the gloves. Hence Ashworth House. Hence Eleanor, standing in the East Corridor on a Tuesday afternoon with a tray of correspondence and the absolute certainty that she had, finally, found a place where no one would think to look for her. She was wrong about that too. She had arrived at Ashworth House on a wet Thursday in October, with a reference letter that was genuine. Mrs. Garrett had known her mother's housekeeper, a connection so distant and so old that it required no scrutiny, and a name that was half true. Eleanor Hart. Not a lie, exactly. A compression. The kind that felt survivable. Mrs. Garrett had looked at her with the sharp eyes of a woman who had been running a ducal household for 20 years and could identify, on sight, someone who had never held a tray before. "You've worked in service," she said. It was not quite a question. "I've worked in a household," Eleanor said, carefully. "A smaller one." This was true. She had run her own household for 3 years. She had simply been on the other side of the tray. Mrs. Garrett had looked at her for a long moment, the assessing look of a woman deciding whether the thing that was slightly wrong about this applicant was the kind of slightly wrong she could manage or the kind she couldn't. Eleanor had held her gaze with the steady calm of someone who had been practicing steadiness for 6 months and had become, out of necessity, quite good at it. "You'll start in the East Wing," Mrs. Garrett said. "Correspondence, morning rooms, the library. His Grace is in the country until the end of the month." His Grace is in the country. The most useful sentence Eleanor had heard in weeks. She had taken the position, and the plain cotton gloves, and the name that was half true, and had spent 2 weeks being very carefully invisible. It was almost peaceful. The East Wing was quiet, a library that smelled of old paper and wood smoke, a morning room that no one used in October, a correspondence desk that required sorting and filing and the particular focused attention of work that occupied the hands without demanding the mind. She could think, in the East Wing. She could breathe. She thought about Frederick's papers, the ones she had found in the locked drawer 6 weeks after the funeral, the ones she had read once with her hands shaking and then locked away again because knowing what was in them meant deciding what to do about them. She thought about the 2 men who had come to the house on Grosvenor Street 3 weeks after that, polite and patient and terrifying in the specific way of men who had been sent by someone with both patience and resources. She thought about what they had asked for. She thought about what she had said. "I don't know what you mean, there are no papers, I'm afraid you've been misinformed," and whether they had believed her, and whether believing her had been sufficient, and whether it would continue to be. She thought about these things in the east wing of Ashworth House while she sorted the correspondence, and then she put them away carefully, as she put everything away carefully, and got on with the work. She was good at getting on with things. It was the only skill she was entirely confident she possessed. The Duke was not supposed to arrive until the end of the month. This was the first thing Eleanor thought, afterward, not the tray, not the sound of it, not the particular quality of the silence that followed. The first thought was simply, he wasn't supposed to be here. She had been crossing the east corridor at 3:30 with the afternoon correspondence, a neat stack of letters on a silver tray, sorted by sender as Mrs. Garrett had shown her, tied with the household's particular burgundy ribbon, and the corridor had been empty, as it always was at 3:30, as it had been every afternoon for 2 weeks. And she had been thinking about Frederick's papers and whether the locked box she had left with her cousin in Kensington was sufficiently safe. And she had turned the corner at the end of the corridor and walked directly into William Cavendish, Duke of Ashworth, who was not supposed to be here until the end of the month. The tray went first. Then the letters, 17 of them, the burgundy ribbon coming loose mid-air, paper fanning across the corridor floor, and the particular slow catastrophe of things falling in the wrong place at the wrong time. Then the silence. Eleanor stood in the middle of it with empty hands and looked up at the man she had just collided with, and felt the blood leave her face in a single cold wave. She knew him. Not well, they had never been introduced, had never spoken, existed in overlapping worlds that had touched once, briefly, 5 years ago. But she knew his face. She had last seen it across the aisle of St. George's, Hanover Square, on the morning of her wedding, in the third pew on the left, turned slightly toward the altar with the composed attention of a man attending a social obligation he had accepted without particular enthusiasm. He had looked at her once, she remembered. A glance, nothing more, the automatic attention of a room full of people all looking at the same thing. She had been looking at Frederick. She had barely registered it. She had registered it enough, apparently, to remember it 5 years later, standing in his corridor with his correspondence at her feet. "Think," she told herself. "You are Eleanor Hart. You have never seen this man before. You are a housemaid and you have dropped the tray and you are about to be dismissed, and that is the worst thing that is happening right now." She lowered her eyes. Bent to retrieve the letters. Kept her voice from shaking by the particular effort she had been practicing for 6 months. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace. I didn't hear you arrive. I'll have this cleared immediately." He had not expected to be here until the end of the month either. The country had become, by the 3rd week, insufferable in the specific way that places become insufferable when you are using them to avoid thinking about something, which was to say, the thing followed you there, and sat with you at dinner, and kept you awake at 3 in the morning with the same patience it had shown in London. So he had come back early, without sending word, because sending word would have required explaining himself to someone, and he was not prepared to explain himself to anyone. He was thinking about none of this when he turned the corner of the east corridor and walked into a housemaid he had never seen before. The tray went sideways. He stepped back. The letters went everywhere. He had a moment, a single, unhelpful moment, of something that was almost amusement, because the specific geometry of it was genuinely absurd. 17 letters, 1 ribbon, a perfectly good silver tray, all distributed across 30 feet of corridor floor with the thoroughness of a natural disaster. Then the woman bent to collect them and he looked at her face, which was turned down and away in the practiced self-effacement of someone who had learned that invisibility was protective, and something in the shape of it struck him. He looked more carefully. The corridor was well lit, afternoon light through the east-facing windows, clear and direct. He could see her clearly. The dark hair, the particular line of the jaw, the posture that was not quite right for a housemaid, too upright, too composed, the composure of someone who had been taught to carry themselves well and had not entirely unlearned it. I have seen this face before. Not recently. Somewhere, sometime, in the particular way that faces lodge themselves in memory without your permission and refuse to explain why they chose to stay. He crouched to help her collect the letters, which was not what one did, it was not what a duke did, in his own corridor, with a housemaid who had dropped a tray, and he knew it was not what he did, and he did it anyway, because the alternative was standing over her while she gathered them from the floor, which he found he did not want to do. They reached for the same letter at the same moment. Her hand closed on it a half-second before his. And the glove, plain cotton, serviceable, the kind a dozen women in this house wore without a second thought, shifted at the wrist. He saw the ring. It was not a housemaid's ring. It was not a housemaid's ring in the same decisive way that a thoroughbred was not a cart horse, not a matter of degree but of category. Gold, heavy, old. A signet ring, worn on the middle finger of her right hand, with the particular patina of something that had been handled daily for years. He knew that ring. He had seen it across a dinner table 4 years ago, on the hand of Frederick Voss, who had worn it as his father had worn it before him, the Voss family seal, a small engraved crest that William had noticed because he noticed such things, because the details of people told you what the surface of them didn't. Frederick Voss was dead. He had died 6 months ago. William had received the notice with the mild regret one felt for acquaintances. Frederick had been pleasant enough, unremarkable in most ways, the kind of man who occupied a room comfortably without particularly filling it. He had attended the brief memorial. He had thought, briefly, about the wife. The wife had been, by all accounts, absent from society since the funeral. No calls, no appearances, no explanation offered to the curious, which the curious had found fascinating and interpreted variously as grief or breakdown or something more interesting. He looked at the ring. He looked at the woman's face, still turned down, still composed, still entirely focused on collecting the letters with the concentrated attention of someone refusing to look at him. He looked at the ring again. Frederick Voss's wife. He had seen her once. A wedding, 5 years ago, St. George's, third pew, the particular moment when a room full of people all look at the same thing and he had looked too and she had been. He stopped that thought and set it somewhere else. He picked up the last 3 letters and stood, and waited until she stood too, and when she finally looked up at him he said nothing for a moment. Simply looked at her. Let her understand that the corridor and the tray and the housemaid's uniform and the name she had given Mrs. Garrett were not, at this particular moment, sufficient. Her face was still. Carefully, deliberately still, the stillness of a woman who has been practicing it and has become very good at it and is currently using every bit of that practice to hold an expression that said nothing while her eyes said everything. They were afraid. Not of him, he thought. Or not only of him. Of the tray on the floor and the shifted glove and the end of whatever the last 2 weeks had been, the safety of invisibility, the relief of a place where no one was looking. He had looked. He handed her the letters he was holding and said, quietly, so that it carried no further than the 2 of them. I think, Mrs. Voss, that you should come to the library. He knows. The thought arrived with the particular clarity of something she had been afraid of for 2 weeks and had finally stopped being able to prevent. Not the specific fear, she had not feared him, exactly, had not known he would return early, had not planned for this, but the general fear. The fear that the gloves would shift. That someone would look. That the ring, which she could not bring herself to remove because removing it felt like the last erasure of a life that had already been erased enough, would be seen by someone who recognized it. She had been right to fear it. She was wrong, she thought, to have assumed that being seen meant being ruined. He had not shouted. He had not called for Mrs. Garrett. He had crouched in his own corridor and helped her pick up letters and said her name quietly, with the care of someone handling something fragile, and asked her to come to the library. She followed him because the alternatives, running, which was undignified and ineffective, or lying, which she had already failed at, were worse. The library was warm. He closed the door behind them, which she noted, and crossed to the fireplace, and stood with his back to it in the way of a man who wanted the light behind him, which she also noted. She stood near the door with the tray in her hands and waited. "Sit down," he said. "I'd rather stand." A pause. Something moved in his expression, not irritation. The recalibration she would come to recognize. "All right. You know who I am," she said. Better to confirm it than to wait for him to confirm it, because waiting gave him the shape of the conversation. "I know who you were," he said, carefully. "I'm less certain who you are at the moment." "Eleanor Hart," she said. "Housemaid. East Wing." "Eleanor Voss," he said. "Frederick's wife. Widow." He looked at the tray in her hands with an expression that was not unkind. "Put the tray down." She put it down, on the nearest surface, because holding it had become absurd and she was tired of absurd things. "He's been dead 6 months," William said. "You've been here 2 weeks. What happened in between?" She looked at him across the library, this man she had seen once, across an aisle, 5 years ago, who had crouched in a corridor to help her pick up letters and had seen the ring and had brought her here quietly and was now asking the question she had been carrying alone for 6 months with the direct simplicity of someone who intended to actually listen to the answer. She thought about the 2 men on Grosvenor Street. She thought about the locked box in Kensington. She thought about Frederick's papers and what was in them and what it meant that she was the only person left who knew where they were. "That," she said, "is a long story." "I'm home early," he said. "I have time." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she sat down, which she had said she didn't want to do, because she was tired, genuinely, deeply tired in the way of someone who has been standing alone in the middle of a difficult thing for too long, and he sat across from her, and the fire crackled between them, and Eleanor Voss, who had spent 2 weeks being invisible, began, carefully, partially, in the measured installments of someone who has learned that trust is a thing you extend in increments, to be seen. She told him enough. Not everything, he understood that, could feel the shape of what she was leaving out, the careful omissions of a woman who had learned that full disclosure was a luxury and was not yet certain he had earned it. But enough, Frederick's death. The men who had come to the house. The decision to disappear, to become someone smaller and less findable. She did not tell him about the papers. He noted the absence of them the way you note a missing piece in a familiar picture, not accusatorially, simply as information. When she finished he was quiet for a moment, turning it over. "The men who came," he said. "Did they give names?" "No." "Describe them." She did, precisely, with the accurate memory of someone who had been frightened and had converted the fright into detail. He listened and filed it and felt something settle in him that was not quite certainty but was in its direction. He knew men like that. He knew, more to the point, the kind of business that generated men like that, and Frederick Voss had been, in his last 2 years, circling the edges of that kind of business with the confidence of a man who didn't understand what he was circling. William had thought about warning him, once. He had not. He set that aside. "You're safe here," he said. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has been told reassuring things by people who didn't fully understand the situation. "You don't know that." "No," he agreed. "But I know this house, and I know the people in it, and I know how to make it difficult for men like the ones you've described to get near something I'm paying attention to." He met her eyes. "I'm paying attention." She was quiet for a moment. Why? She said. Simply that. The question underneath all the other questions. He thought about St. George's, Hanover Square. The morning light through the high windows. A woman in a white dress who had not looked at him and whom he had looked at anyway, briefly, for no reason he had examined at the time. Because you picked up the letters, he said, which was not the full answer and was not false either. You didn't wait for someone else to do it. You just got on with it. He paused. I find it difficult to walk away from people who simply get on with things. She looked at him for a long moment. That, she said finally, is the strangest reason I have ever been offered help. Is it sufficient? Another pause. Longer. For now, she said. That night, in the small room at the top of the east wing that had been Eleanor Hart's for 2 weeks, Eleanor Voss sat on the edge of the narrow bed and looked at her hands. She had taken the gloves off. This was the first time, since Grosvenor Street, that she had done it in a room where someone else knew who she was. The ring sat on her finger in the candlelight, the Voss seal, heavy and old and familiar, and she turned her hand slowly and looked at it and thought about Frederick. She thought about the papers in the locked box in Kensington. She thought about a man crouching in a corridor to help her pick up letters, which was not what dukes did, which was not what anyone had done for her in 6 months. She thought about I'm paying attention, said with the particular steadiness of someone who meant exactly what they said. She should leave. She knew this. Staying in Ashworth House was no longer the simple invisible safety it had been this morning. He knew her name. He would ask more questions. The locked box in Kensington and what was in it would become, eventually, impossible to keep out of the conversation. And there was the other thing. The thing she was not going to examine tonight, in the narrow bed in the east wing, with the candle burning low. The way he had looked at her. Not the way men looked at housemaids. Not the way men looked at widows, either, that particular combination of sympathy and calculation she had been navigating for 6 months. Something else. Something that had the quality, she thought, of recognition, not of who she was, but of something underneath that. She had been invisible for 2 weeks. She was not certain, now, whether she wanted to be invisible anymore. This was inconvenient. She blew out the candle and lay in the dark and told herself it was a decision for tomorrow. Tomorrow arrived, as it always did. She stayed. She was in the library at 7 o'clock. Not because she had been asked. Mrs. Garrett's instructions placed her in the East Wing morning rooms at 7, dusting, which was what she had been doing every morning for 2 weeks. But the morning rooms felt, this particular morning, like a place she could not be. Too open. Too many windows facing the street. Too much of the outside world looking in. The library had one door and no street-facing windows and smelled like old paper and wood smoke, and Eleanor had discovered, in 2 weeks of East Wing work, that it was the room in Ashworth House that felt most like somewhere a person could think. She was thinking very hard. She had the letters from yesterday sorted in her lap, recovered, re-ribboned, entirely undamaged, and she was not reading them. She was thinking about the locked box in Kensington and whether its location was still known only to her cousin, and whether her cousin was still in Kensington, and whether the 2 men from Grosvenor Street had the patience to follow a widow who had disappeared into domestic service or whether they had decided the papers were elsewhere and moved on. She was thinking about whether staying was wise. She had concluded, 3 times since 5 o'clock this morning, that it was not. She had not left. You're in the wrong room. She looked up. William was in the doorway, earlier than she had expected, dressed for the day, with the alert quality of someone who had slept adequately and woken with intention. He looked at the letters in her lap. Mrs. Garrett's schedule has me in the morning rooms, Eleanor said. I'll speak to Mrs. Garrett. He crossed to his desk and sat down. You sorted those yesterday. I resorted them. The fall disrupted the order. They look sorted to me. They are now. She set them on the side table with the precision of someone who needed something to do with their hands. Your Grace. William, he said, without looking up from the paper he had opened. She stopped. He looked up. We established last night that you're not a housemaid. The formality seems excessive. We established, she said carefully, that you know I'm not a housemaid. That isn't the same thing as Eleanor. He said it with the same quiet directness as the night before, her name, simply, without management. Sit down. I have something to ask you, and I'd prefer it if you weren't standing near the door as though you're calculating the distance to it. She looked at the door. She looked at him. She sat down. The men who came to Grosvenor Street, he said. You said there were two. You said they were polite. Yes. Polite in the way of men who have been told to be polite, or polite in the way of men who are naturally so. She considered this. It was, she thought, a more precise question than most people would have thought to ask. The former. There was a quality to it. Like a coat put on for a specific purpose. He nodded, slowly. And what they asked for, you said papers. Documents. He held her gaze. What kind of documents? The locked box in Kensington sat in Eleanor's mind with the particular weight of something she had been carrying alone for 6 months. I told you last night, she said carefully, that I didn't know what they meant. You told them that, William said. I'm asking what you told me. She was quiet for a moment. You notice things, she said. Not accusatory. Simply an observation. Yes. He didn't apologize for it. It's a habit. Occasionally useful. He set down the paper he had been holding. Eleanor. I told you last night that I'm paying attention. That means I'm also paying attention to what you're not saying. A pause. I'm not going to force it. But I want you to understand that whatever Frederick was involved in, I have some idea of its shape, if not its specifics. And that idea is why I'm concerned. She looked at him. How? He was in my world, peripherally. The last 2 years, he was making connections he shouldn't have been making, with people who don't release their connections easily. He paused. I noticed it. I didn't act on it, which I've thought about since. Something moved in his expression, brief, controlled. His death was convenient for several people. I imagine you know that. The fire. The room. Eleanor looked at her hands, the ring catching the morning light. There are papers, she said. Finally. The first time she had said it to anyone. In a locked box. With my cousin in Kensington. She looked up. Frederick kept records. Of everything, names, transactions, dates. I think he kept them because he was afraid. Because if anything happened to him, he wanted, she stopped. I think he wanted to make sure it didn't simply disappear. But it could disappear, William said quietly, if they found the box. Yes. And if they found you? Yes. He was quiet for a moment, turning this over with the systematic attention she was beginning to recognize as his particular mode of thinking, not fast, not impulsive, but thorough. The thinking of a man who moved slowly and arrived correctly. The box needs to move, he said. I know. Can you reach your cousin without being traced? Yes. I think so. I'll send someone with you, he said. Today, if you're willing. She looked at him. At the straightforward practicality of it, no drama, no excessive reassurance, simply the next necessary thing identified and addressed. "You're doing it again," she said. "Doing what?" "Making it difficult to refuse help." Something shifted in his expression, the almost smile she had seen in the corridor yesterday, brief and genuine. "I'll take that as a yes." The cousin's name was Jane, and she lived in a narrow house in Kensington with 3 children and a husband who traveled for business and an admirable capacity for not asking questions that Eleanor had always appreciated. Jane received them, Eleanor and the quiet, capable man William had sent with her, who introduced himself only as Harwick and whose precise function Eleanor decided not to examine too closely, with the calm of someone who had been waiting for something like this without knowing what shape it would take. The box was in the back of a wardrobe, behind winter coats that smelled of cedar. Eleanor unlocked it herself, with the key she had worn on a chain under her housemaid's uniform for 6 months, another thing she could not bring herself to remove. Inside, Frederick's papers. 43 pages in his own hand, organized with the meticulous care of a man who had understood, at some point in his last 2 years, that he was building something that might need to be found. She did not read them in Jane's back bedroom. She had read them once, enough to understand the shape of what Frederick had been doing, the names involved, the particular transactions that connected certain powerful men to certain very unpowerful outcomes. She had not read them again because once had been sufficient and because reading them a second time meant making a decision about what to do with them, and she had not been ready for that decision. She might, she thought, be approaching ready. She put the papers back in the box and locked it and put the key back on the chain and looked at Harwick, who was standing in the doorway with the patient neutrality of someone paid to be patient and neutral. "His Grace's house," he said. "His Grace's house," she agreed. Jane walked them to the door and held Eleanor's hand for a moment before she left. "Are you all right?" Jane said. "Not meaning today. Meaning the whole of it. The 6 months, the widow's black she wasn't wearing anymore, the housemaid's dress she was." "Not yet," Eleanor said honestly. "But I think I might be getting there." Jane looked at her with the assessing love of a cousin who has known you since childhood. "The Duke," she said. "Is he?" "Jane. I'm only asking." "I know what you're asking," Eleanor said, "and I don't have an answer yet." Jane smiled, the smile of a woman who considered not yet an answer of its own kind. Eleanor got into the carriage and did not look back. He worked while she was gone. Or he attempted to work, which was not the same thing, and which he acknowledged to himself with the honesty he tried to apply to his own interior weather. He sat at his desk with the estate correspondence and the parliamentary papers he had brought from the country and moved through them with less than his usual thoroughness, because part of his attention was in Kensington, following a woman with a locked box and 6 months of a loan. He thought about Frederick Voss. He thought about the dinner party, 4 years ago, Lord Ashby's, where he had sat across from Frederick and watched him talk about his business interests with the easy confidence of a man who had never been wrong about anything yet. He had liked Frederick well enough, in the mild way one likes pleasant unremarkable people. He had noticed, over the following years, the change, the new connections, the names that appeared alongside his at certain events, the subtle shift in the quality of his confidence from easy to effortful. He had thought about saying something. He had decided it was not his business. He looked at the fire and thought about what was and wasn't one's business, and what the consequences of that decision had been, and whether Eleanor Voss sitting in his library the night before, carefully, partially, in the measured installments of a woman who had learned to trust in increments, was something he could have prevented. Probably not. The thought was less comforting than it should have been. He thought about St. George's. The morning light. The white dress. This was not the first time he had thought about it in 6 months. He had thought about it when the notice of Frederick's death arrived, briefly, with the uncomfortable specificity of a memory that had no business being as clear as it was. A glance across an aisle. Nothing more. He had told himself, then, that it was simply that kind of face. The kind you remembered without deciding to. He was less certain of that explanation today than he had been yesterday. She returned at 1:30. She came to the library directly, not to the East Wing, not to Mrs. Garrett, directly to the library, and set the locked box on his desk with the particular care of someone setting down something they have been carrying for too long. "It's here," she said. "What do we do with it?" He looked at the box. Then at her. "We read it," he said. "Together. And then we decide." She looked at him for a moment. At the together, which had arrived so naturally in the sentence that she wasn't certain he had noticed saying it. "You should know," she said, "that some of the names in those papers are significant. People with significant resources and significant motivation to keep these documents from becoming known." "I assumed," he said. "It could be dangerous." "I assumed that too." "Then why?" She stopped. The question from last night, returning. "Why?" He looked at her steadily. "Open the box, Eleanor." She opened the box. They read for 2 hours. He read with the focused attention of a man processing information systematically, making occasional notes in the margin of a separate page, cross-referencing names with the knowledge he carried from his own world. She watched him read and found, to her slight surprise, that it was not uncomfortable, sitting across from someone who was finally in the same room as the things she had been carrying alone. The papers were what she had remembered, Frederick's meticulous record of 2 years of increasingly dangerous associations. Names, dates, transactions. Money moved through channels that had no legitimate explanation. Favors exchanged between men who could not afford to be seen exchanging them. And, at the center of it, 3 names that appeared repeatedly, men of sufficient power that Frederick had apparently understood, toward the end, that he had involved himself in something he could not simply leave. William set down the last page and was quiet for a moment. He was frightened, Eleanor said. It was not a question. Yes. William looked at the papers with an expression she couldn't entirely read. He was also, these are thorough. He was protecting himself, but he was also, I think he knew this would outlast him. That someone would need to be able to use it. He was protecting me, Eleanor said quietly. It had taken her 6 months to arrive at this conclusion. Saying it aloud was different, smaller and larger at the same time. He didn't tell me what he was doing, which I was angry about that, for a long time. I'm still angry about it. But the papers, they're organized for someone else to read. Someone who didn't know the context. She paused. He was leaving me something to use. William looked at her. Did you love him? He asked. Quietly, without pressure. The question of a man who wanted to understand, not the question of a man who wanted a particular answer. She thought about it honestly, as she tried to think about everything. I cared for him, she said. He was kind to me, genuinely kind, which I don't say as a consolation, I mean it as a fact. He was not the man I thought he was when I married him, but the man I discovered he was still, in most of the ways that mattered, someone I could respect. She paused. I'm angry that he put me in this position. I'm also aware that he tried, in the end, to give me the means to get out of it. She looked at the papers. It's not a simple accounting. No, William said. It rarely is. They sat with that for a moment. The 3 names, Eleanor said. Can you do something with them? Yes, he said. Not I think so, not perhaps. Simply yes, with the steadiness of a man who knew his own reach. Not immediately. Carefully. But yes. And in the meantime? In the meantime, he said, you stay here. Not as Eleanor Hart. He met her eyes. As yourself. Mrs. Garrett received the news with the expression of a woman who had known something was wrong and was now discovering she had been wrong about what. "Mrs. Voss," she said, trying the name. "Yes," William said. She has been my guest," William said, pleasantly, in the tone that allowed no productive disagreement. "She will continue to be my guest, in the appropriate rooms. Please have the East Wing guest suite prepared." Mrs. Garrett looked at Eleanor with the assessing gaze of 20 years' service, recalibrating, recategorizing, arriving at some internal conclusion that her expression did not share. "Yes, Your Grace," she said. When she left, Eleanor turned to William. "She knows something is unusual," Eleanor said. "Mrs. Garrett always knows something is unusual," William said. "She has the discretion of someone who has been running a ducal household for 20 years. It will be fine." "You're very certain of things." "I'm certain of the things I know well," he said. "Mrs. Garrett I know well." A pause. "You I'm still learning." She looked at him. The afternoon light was doing something particular in the library, low and amber, the specific quality of late October light that made everything look slightly more significant than it was. Or perhaps, she thought, exactly as significant as it was. "The East Wing guest suite," she said. That's several steps from a housemaid's room." "Yes," he agreed. "People will notice." "Some will," he said. "The ones who matter will understand that a widow under uncertain circumstances required a safe place, and that I provided one, and that it is none of their business." He held her gaze. "The ones who don't matter will invent a story. They'll do that regardless." Eleanor thought about invisibility. About 2 weeks of small and careful and gloved. "I'll need different clothes," she said, which was the practical thing, which was the thing she said when the other things were too large to say yet. "Harriet will help," he said immediately. "My cousin, she's nearby, she'll understand the situation, and she has very strong opinions about what constitutes appropriate attire, which I have always found excessive and which will, in this case, be genuinely useful." Eleanor almost smiled. She felt it arrive and did not suppress it entirely. "You have an answer for everything," she said. "Not everything," he said. "Some things I'm still working on." She looked at him, at the honest face and the steady gaze and the careful, thorough attention that had been, from the moment she turned the corner of the east corridor with a tray in her hands, entirely unlike anything she had been prepared for. "William," she said. His name, for the first time. Simply that. Something in his expression shifted, almost imperceptible, the particular movement of a man who has been waiting for something and has not been certain it would come. "Yes," he said. "Thank you," she said. "For the corridor." "For all of it." He looked at her for a moment. "The corridor," he said, "was an accident." "I know." "The rest," he said quietly, "was not." The fire crackled. Outside, London continued in the grey October afternoon, entirely unaware that in a library in Ashworth House, 2 people were sitting across from each other with a locked box of dangerous papers between them, and finding it, somehow, the most natural thing in the world. That night, in the East Wing guest suite, which was warm and large and nothing like the narrow room at the top of the house, Eleanor sat at the writing desk and did something she had not done since Frederick died. She wrote. Not a letter. Not to anyone specific. Simply, words. The specific relief of putting things outside herself, where they could be looked at rather than carried. She wrote about the corridor and the drop tray and the ring and the particular quality of a man who crouched to help pick up letters when he had no reason to. She wrote, he said the corridor was an accident. The rest was not. She looked at that sentence for a long time. Then she wrote, underneath it, in the honest privacy of a page no one else would read. I believe him. That is either very wise or very foolish, and I cannot yet determine which. She set down the pen. She looked at the ring. She thought about Frederick, about kindness and secrets and the locked box that was now in William's safe and the papers that were finally, after 6 months, in hands that knew what to do with them. I'm sorry, she thought, in the direction of him. Not for all of it. But for the anger, which had been justified, and which she was beginning, slowly, carefully, in increments, to set down. She blew out the lamp. In the dark, in the warm room that was nothing like the narrow one, Eleanor Voss let herself think about tomorrow without dread for the first time in 6 months. It felt, she thought, like something beginning. She was not certain what. But beginnings, she had learned, did not require certainty. They only required the willingness to stay. The house rearranged itself around her presence with the quiet efficiency of a well-run household absorbing an unexpected variable. Mrs. Garrett, to her credit, managed it without visible seams. The East Wing guest suite was prepared by the following morning with fresh linens and a fire that had been burning long enough to take the chill out of the walls. Eleanor's few belongings, a small bag, 2 dresses, her mother's old writing case, were moved from the housemaid's room without ceremony or comment. The other staff received, through the particular osmosis of below-stairs communication, some version of the situation that was sufficient to produce respectful distance without the particular quality of attention that would have been worse. Eleanor moved through this rearrangement with the careful composure of someone accepting help she had not asked for and was not yet certain how to hold. She was not Eleanor Hart anymore. She was not quite Eleanor Voss either, not in the way she had been, the widow on Grosvenor Street, the woman in black navigating the specific social geometry of recent bereavement. That version of herself felt like a room she had left and was not certain she could re-enter. She was something in between. Something that didn't have a name yet. She found she could live with that, temporarily. What she found harder to live with was breakfast. William had apparently decided, without discussion, that she would take her meals with him. This was announced not as an announcement but as a simple fact, Mrs. Garrett informing her, on the first morning, that breakfast was served in the small dining room at 8, and finding her there at 5 past because arriving exactly on time felt like trying too hard and arriving late felt like ingratitude. He was already there, with coffee and the morning papers, and he looked up when she came in with the alert quality of someone who had been aware of the sound of her approach and had decided not to acknowledge that awareness. "Coffee," he said. "Or tea?" "Coffee," she said, because it was what she actually wanted, and she had spent 2 weeks asking for tea because housemaids drank tea, and this, apparently, was the kind of detail she had managed to get right. He noted this without commenting on it, which she appreciated. They sat across from each other with the morning papers and the coffee and the specific quality of 2 people negotiating the territory of an arrangement that had no precedent and therefore no established rules. She reached across and took the section of the paper he had finished. He did not comment on this either. After a moment, "I wrote to Harriet last night," he said. "She'll come this afternoon." "You told her about me?" "I told her a widow of my acquaintance required assistance with her wardrobe and would she please come and be helpful without asking too many questions." He turned a page. "She will ask exactly as many questions as she wants, which will be considerable. I want you to be prepared for that." "I've been managing considerable questions for 6 months," Eleanor said. "Harriet's are different," he said. "She asks the ones you don't expect." Eleanor looked at him over the edge of the newspaper. "Is that a warning?" "It's information," he said. "What you do with it is up to you." She returned to the paper. After another moment, without looking up, "There's a piece on page 4 about Lord Carston." She turned to page 4. "Read it." Looked up. "He's one of the 3 names," she said quietly. "Yes. He's being celebrated for charitable work in the East End." Yes. Something in William's voice was entirely even. He does a great deal of charitable work. It's very useful for him. Eleanor looked at the paper. At Lord Carston's photograph, a broad, pleasant-faced man of 50-something, caught mid-laugh at some civic function, the very picture of benevolent prosperity. She thought about Frederick's papers. About what Lord Carston's name appeared beside, in Frederick's meticulous handwriting. "I see," she said. "Yes," William said. "I thought you might." Harriet arrived at 2 o'clock with the energy of someone who had been given partial information and was determined to fill in the rest through direct observation. She was, Eleanor saw immediately, the kind of woman who took up exactly as much space as she wanted and had long since stopped calculating how much that was. She came into the sitting room where Eleanor was waiting with the direct gaze of someone conducting a rapid assessment and not bothering to conceal it. "Mrs. Voss," she said. "I'm Harriet Moore. William's cousin." She sat down without being invited. "He told me you needed help with your wardrobe." He was being tactful, Eleanor said. "I have 2 dresses and a housemaid's uniform. I need something to wear." Harriet looked at her for a moment. Then she smiled, wide and genuine, the smile of a woman who has just received more honesty than she expected and found it entirely refreshing. "I'm going to like you," she said. "William said I would and I told him to stop being smug about things, but he was right, which is irritating." She settled into the chair with the comfort of someone entirely at home in spaces that weren't hers. "He also told me not to ask too many questions. He warned me that you would anyway. He knows me very well." She tilted her head. "I'll make you a bargain. I have one question, one specific question, and not about the wardrobe, and if you answer it honestly, I'll spend the rest of the afternoon being practically useful and asking nothing else." Eleanor looked at her. At the direct gaze and the complete absence of social performance. "Ask," she said. "Are you in danger?" It was, Eleanor thought, the question she had not been asked. Not by anyone. People had asked about Frederick, about her plans, about the house on Grosvenor Street, about her family, about her finances. No one had asked the simple, direct question of whether she was currently in a situation that might hurt her. "Yes," she said. "Though less so than I was a week ago." Harriet nodded, as though this confirmed something. "William is good at that," she said. "Making things less dangerous. He does it quietly, most people don't notice until it's already done." She stood. "All right. Wardrobe. I have opinions." "He said you would." "He's right about most things," Harriet said, with the tone of someone who has spent years being mildly annoyed by this. "Don't tell him I said so." The afternoon was, unexpectedly, the closest thing to ordinary Eleanor had experienced in 6 months. Harriet had brought 3 of her own dresses, close enough in size to require only minor alteration, a skill Harriet applied with competent efficiency, and had opinions about all of them that she delivered in the running commentary of someone who had decided Eleanor was worth the full version of herself. "This one," Harriet said, holding up a deep green wool, "is the correct dress for a woman who wants to be taken seriously without trying to look like she's trying to be taken seriously. Which, from what William hasn't told me, seems relevant." "You're very perceptive," Eleanor said. "I'm very nosy," Harriet corrected. "There's a difference. Perceptive is passive. I actively look for things." She held the dress against Eleanor. "Yes. That one." Eleanor looked at herself in the glass, the green dress, her own face, the ring on her right hand catching the afternoon light. "He noticed the ring," she said. It came out before she decided to say it. Harriet set down the dress. "In the corridor?" "Yes. Of course he did. She said it without surprise. William notices things other people miss. He always has. It used to unsettle people when he was young. He learned to do it quietly. She was quiet for a moment. Frederick's ring? Yes. He knew Frederick. I know. Harriet looked at her in the glass with the expression of a woman who had kept her bargain and asked one question and was now visibly exercising considerable restraint. Thank you, Eleanor said. For the dress. And for not asking. I have plenty of time, Harriet said pleasantly. You're staying. It was not a question. Eleanor looked at her own reflection. Yes, she said. I think I am. The man came on the third day. He arrived at the front entrance of Ashworth House at 11 in the morning, which was audacious, Eleanor thought, when she heard about it afterward. Not the servant's entrance, not a note through an intermediary. The front door. As though he had the right. She was in the library when Harwick came to find William, who was also in the library, and the exchange between them was brief and quiet and conducted in the particular shorthand of two people who had worked together long enough to compress information. The name? William said. Pruitt, he says. Sent by Mr. Lyle. Something moved through William's expression, controlled, rapid. Eleanor watched it and filed it. Keep him in the entrance hall, William said. I'll be down in a moment. Harwick left. William turned to Eleanor. Lyle is one of the three names, she said. It wasn't a question. The second one, yes. He was already thinking, she could see it, the systematic movement of a mind working through positions and angles. He's not here by accident. Someone told him you were here. How? I don't know yet. He looked at her with the direct attention she had come to recognize as his version of reassurance, not soft, but present. Stay here. I mean that, not from fear, from strategy. If he sees you, the situation changes. As long as he's uncertain where you are, I have more to work with. What will you tell him? As little as possible. He moved toward the door. Stopped. Eleanor. Yes. The box is in the safe. No one else knows the combination. He met her eyes. Whatever happens in the next 20 minutes, the papers are secure. She nodded. He left. She sat in the library and listened to the house and thought about Frederick's name in those papers next to Lyle's, and what it had cost her husband to keep the record, and what it might cost her to use it. She heard nothing from the entrance hall, the library was too far, the house too well built. But she heard the front door close, 10 minutes later, and the particular quality of footsteps returning that she had already learned to identify as William's. He came back to the library and sat down across from her and was quiet for a moment with the focused stillness of a man organizing information before he spoke it. He knows you're in London, he said. He doesn't know you're here, he was testing. Looking for a reaction. He paused. I didn't give him one. What does he want? What they all want. He looked at the fire. The papers, or their destruction. Same outcome either way, Frederick's record ceased to exist and the men whose names are in them continue without consequence. And if they get what they want? He looked at her directly. Then people who have done significant harm continue doing it. And the record Frederick died keeping disappears as though it never existed. The record Frederick died keeping. She heard it land, the specific phrase, the specific weight of it. You think he was killed, she said quietly. William was quiet for a moment. I think the timing is convenient. I think men like Lyle are not accustomed to loose ends, and Frederick had become a loose end. He paused. I can't prove it. But yes. Eleanor sat with this. She had thought it herself, in the weeks after the funeral, in the dark, in the particular way that the mind returns to questions it knows are dangerous because the answers matter. She had thought it and had not been able to hold it, because holding it meant deciding what to do with it, and deciding what to do with it required resources she did not have. She had them now. "Then we use the papers," she said. William looked at her. "Yes." "How?" "Carefully," he said. "And with allies who can receive the information in ways that produce consequences these men cannot simply manage away." He paused. "I have one in mind. A man in Parliament. He's been watching Lyle and Carston for 2 years without sufficient cause to act. Frederick's papers would give him cause. Can you trust him?" "Yes." "Completely?" "Completely." He met her eyes. "I don't use that word loosely." She believed him. This was, she thought, both sensible and slightly alarming, the speed at which she had come to believe him. She filed this observation next to the others and kept going. "When?" she said. "I need 3 days to arrange a meeting," he said. "In the meantime, I need you to stay close to the house." "I'm not going to run," she said. "I know." He said it simply, without the quality of a compliment, simply a fact he had already established. "I mean close to the house because the streets are less safe than I'd like until this is resolved, and I find I would prefer you not to be on them alone." She looked at him. "You find," she said. "Yes." That's a very careful way of saying something. Something moved in his expression, the contained warmth she had begun to notice, which arrived briefly and was managed quickly and which she suspected he was not entirely aware of. "It's an honest way of saying it," he said. "Which is what I prefer." She held his gaze for a moment. 3 days, she said. 3 days, he agreed. It was raining. The specific London rain of late October, not dramatic, not sheeting, simply persistent, the kind that settled into everything and made the city gray in a way that was its own kind of beauty. Eleanor stood at the library window and watched it move through the lamplight outside and felt, for the first time in a long time, the particular quality of being inside and warm while the difficult thing was outside. She heard him before she saw him, the sound of the library door, the particular footstep. "You're not reading," William said. "I'm watching the rain." "Is that productive?" "Occasionally." She didn't turn from the window. "When it gives the mind something to do while it works on something else." He came to stand beside her, which was close enough that she was aware of it, the specific awareness of proximity that she had been managing for 2 days with the same careful attention she gave to everything. He looked at the rain. "What is your mind working on?" he said. She considered the honest answer. "What comes after," she said. "When the papers are delivered and Lyle and Carston are managed, or whatever the correct word is. When the threat is gone." She paused. "I've been in survival for so long that I've stopped being able to see past it." "What did you see, before?" She thought about it. Before Frederick, before the marriage, before the season that had produced it, back to the girl who had been briefly hopeful in the way that girls are briefly hopeful. "I wanted to do something," she said. "Something that used this." She gestured, vaguely, at herself. "I was good at organizing things. At seeing the shape of complicated situations. She paused. At knowing which details mattered and which didn't. My father used to say I had a mind for it." He meant it as a mild criticism. "It sounds like a significant asset." "It is," she said, simply, because false modesty would have been dishonest. "I just haven't had a sanctioned place to use it." He was quiet for a moment. "You've been using it here," he said. "The past 3 days. The way you read the papers, you connected things I hadn't connected yet." The question you asked about Pruitt, he paused. You asked the right question immediately. She looked at him. You noticed that. I notice things, he said. A slight pause. I've been noticing things about you specifically since a corridor and a drop tray, which I'm aware is recent. But I don't think the noticing is wrong. The rain. The lamplight. The specific quality of two people standing beside each other having a conversation that was, on its surface, about the future, and was, underneath, about something neither of them had named yet. William, she said. Yes. In the corridor, when you saw the ring. She turned to look at him. You recognized it. But you also recognized me. I could see it, something in your face, before you placed the ring. He was quiet for a moment. St. George's, he said. 5 years ago. Frederick's wedding. You were in the third pew. He looked at her. You remember. I remember the church, she said carefully. I don't think I registered you specifically. Not at the time. She paused. But you registered me. Yes, he said. Without apology or excessive explanation. Simply yes. Why? He was quiet for a long moment, in the way of someone locating an honest answer rather than a convenient one. I don't know, he said finally. I've asked myself that, since the corridor. I don't have a sufficient answer. I noticed you, and I remembered it, and I didn't examine why because there was nothing to do with the examination. He paused. And then you turned that corner with a tray and I recognized your face and I thought, he stopped. What? She said. I thought, he said quietly, there she is. He looked at the rain. Which made no sense. And which I have been attempting to make sense of for 3 days. Eleanor stood beside him in the lamplight. She thought about the narrow room at the top of the east wing, and the writing desk, and the sentence she had written, the rest was not an accident. She thought about Frederick, about kindness and secrets and the locked box, about the man who had tried, at the end, to give her the means to go on. She thought about survival, and what came after, and the particular quality of a mind that had been in motion for 6 months and was only now, in this room, with this man, beginning to consider the possibility of rest. You made sense of it quite quickly, she said. For something that made no sense. Something shifted in his expression, the contained warmth arriving and, this time, not being entirely managed away. I told you, he said. I notice things. She looked at him. So do I, she said. The rain continued. Neither of them moved away from the window. She dreamed about him that night. Not a frightening dream, nothing dramatic. Simply Frederick, as he had been in the ordinary middle of their marriage, before the last 2 years changed the texture of things. Sitting across the breakfast table. Reading the paper. Looking up when she said something and listening, genuinely, with the specific attention of a man who had always been better at listening than most people gave him credit for. In the dream he looked at her across the table and said, "You should stop being angry at me." And she said, "I'm not angry anymore." And he said, "Good. I was worried you'd hold it too long." She woke at 4 in the morning with the gray rain still at the windows and lay in the warm dark and thought about Frederick with the clear-eyed honesty she had been building toward for 6 months. He had loved her, in his limited way. He had been keeping secrets that were not his to keep and had done it out of the particular combination of pride and cowardice that had always been his weakness, the belief that he could manage things alone, that the managing would never catch up with him, that the woman he had married did not need to be burdened with what he could not fix. He had been wrong about that. But he had also, in the end, tried to fix it. The papers were his attempt at fixing it, imperfect, posthumous, too late and too incomplete. But real. He had thought of her, at the end, and tried. She held that. You should stop being angry at me. I'm working on it, she thought. She lay in the dark until the rain stopped, somewhere before dawn, and the silence that came after it was the particular silence of something ending. She felt it end. Not the grief, that would stay, reshaped, for a long time. But the weight of it. The specific exhausted anger of a woman who has been surviving something alone and is beginning, in increments, to set it down. She slept again, lightly, and woke to pale autumn sunlight and the smell of coffee from somewhere below, and felt, tentatively, carefully, in the way of something she did not want to examine too closely in case examining it made it fragile. Something that was almost like herself again. He found her in the garden on the morning of the third day. It was cold, properly cold now, the kind of late October cold that meant what it said, and she was standing near the stone wall with her hands in the pockets of Harriet's green wool coat, looking at the last of the season's roses with the expression of someone who is not actually looking at roses. He came to stand beside her with 2 cups of coffee, one of which he held out without comment. She took it. Today, she said. This afternoon, he confirmed. Harwick will deliver the papers to Alderton at 3. I'll be there. He paused. It will take time, these things always take time. But it will begin today. She nodded. She held the coffee and looked at the roses and thought about the locked box that had been in her cousin's wardrobe for 6 months, and the key on the chain around her neck, and the weight of both. After today, she said. The danger, it won't be gone immediately. No. But it will be diminishing. And I'll know which direction it's coming from, which is most of the battle. And me, she said. He was quiet for a moment. She felt him turn to look at her, though she kept her eyes on the roses. What about you, he said. Carefully. I can't stay here indefinitely, she said. It isn't appropriate, and I'm aware of that, and I don't want to be she stopped. I don't want to be a problem you're managing. You're not. William. You're not, he said again, with the particular steadiness she had come to recognize as his version of absolute. I want to be clear about that. You are not a problem I'm managing. A pause. You are, he stopped, in the way of someone locating the honest word. You are someone I want to be here. That's a different thing entirely. She turned to look at him. He was looking at her with the direct, unguarded attention he usually kept carefully contained, the attention she had felt, in small doses, since the corridor. Without the management. Simply there. 3 days, she said quietly. You've known me 3 days. 4, he said. Counting the corridor. Despite everything, despite the cold and the roses and the papers and Frederick and the whole complicated weight of the past 6 months, she felt something lift. Brief and specific and entirely unexpected. That's not very long, she said. No, he agreed. I'm aware that it's not very long. He held her gaze. I'm also aware that some things don't require long. That some things are simply clear. From the beginning. A pause. The corridor was an accident. But every morning in the small dining room, and every evening in the library, and standing here right now, none of that is accidental. I want you to know that. Eleanor looked at him in the pale October sunlight. She thought about all the things she had said yes to in the past 4 days, the library, the suite, the breakfast, the coffee, the rain at the window and the sentence she had written that she had meant more than she intended. She thought about what came after survival. I know, she said. Quietly, with the full weight of knowing it. He looked at her. Good, he said, which was not nothing. The roses. The cold. The coffee going slightly cool in their hands. Neither of them moved. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, Harwick delivered Frederick Voss's papers to a man named Alderton in a quiet office in Whitehall. William sat across from Alderton for 2 hours, watching the man read, watching the expression of someone who has been waiting for a particular piece of information and is now holding it and understanding what it means. When Alderton set down the last page, he looked up and said, "This is sufficient." "Yes," William said. "It will take time." "I know. But it will be done." "Yes," William said. "I know that too." He came home at 5:30 to find Eleanor in the library, not pretending to read, this time. Actually reading, with the focused attention of someone who had, at some point in the afternoon, stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop and had simply decided to read. She looked up when he came in. He nodded, once. She closed the book. Something moved through her face, not relief, exactly. Or not only relief. Something larger than that, and more specific. The particular expression of a woman setting down a weight she has been carrying for a long time and feeling, for the first time, the shape of her own arms without it. He sat across from her. They sat in the library in the early evening quiet and said nothing for a long moment, because nothing needed to be said yet. Everything that needed to come next could come next. For now, the fire, the books, the pale lamplight. For now, simply this. The danger did not disappear on a specific day. This was something Eleanor had understood intellectually and had to learn, again, in practice, that resolution was not a door that closed cleanly but a tide that went out gradually, leaving the beach altered but still recognizably itself. Alderton moved carefully. William had warned her he would. Carefully meant weeks, not days, and weeks meant living in the particular suspension of a situation that was improving without being finished. She found she could bear it. This surprised her. 6 months of survival had trained her for acute threat, for the sudden knock, the shifted glove, the dropped tray. The long slow business of waiting for powerful men to act carefully was a different kind of endurance, and she discovered she had it. She also discovered, in those weeks, what it meant to be in Ashworth House as herself. It was not what she had expected. She had expected, she was honest enough to name this, a kind of performance. The correct gratitude, the appropriate deference, the careful management of a situation that had no established social form and therefore required constant navigation. She had expected to feel like a guest who was not certain of the rules. She did not feel that way. She felt, with a gradualness that arrived before she noticed it, at home. Not because the house was luxurious, though it was, and not because the arrangement was comfortable, though it was that too. Because the shape of the days had a quality she had not had since before Frederick's last 2 years. Breakfast in the small dining room with the morning papers and the coffee she actually wanted. Long afternoons in the library with the kind of work that used the part of her mind that had been idle too long. Evenings that moved at the pace of two people who had discovered they could be quiet together without it being uncomfortable. She had not known she was missing this. She had not known, precisely, what this was. She was beginning to know. On the 9th day, she reorganized his correspondence system. This was not requested. She had noticed, over breakfast, that his method of organizing incoming papers was chronological rather than categorical, which meant that related matters were distributed across 3 weeks of filing rather than gathered in one place, which meant that cross-referencing required unnecessary time. She reorganized it on a Thursday afternoon while he was at his club, and left it on his desk, and said nothing. He came home at 6 and went to his desk and was quiet for a long moment. Then he appeared in the doorway of the sitting room where she was reading. "You reorganized my correspondence," he said. "Yes. By category. Chronological systems work well for diaries," she said. "For correspondence with ongoing threads, categorical is more efficient." He looked at her. You did this in an afternoon. It wasn't complicated. Your filing was consistent, it only needed a different organizing principle. He was quiet for a moment. The parliamentary material, he said. The Carston correspondence from last spring. I've been looking for a specific letter for 2 weeks. Third folder from the left, she said. Under land disputes, southern counties. He went back to the desk. She heard the sound of a drawer, a folder. A pause. Yes, he said, from the study. She returned to her book. He appeared in the doorway again. Eleanor. Yes. This is genuinely useful. I know, she said. That's why I did it. He looked at her with the expression she had catalogued and still found difficult to entirely read, that contained warmth, and underneath it something that was, she thought, a particular kind of recognition. The recognition of someone seeing a thing they have been looking for without knowing they were looking. What else, he said carefully, do you see that could be improved? She looked at her book. Then she set it down. Sit down, she said. I'll tell you. He sat. She told him. Not just the correspondence, the estate papers, the household accounts, the 3 separate filing systems that did not communicate with each other and therefore required triple the maintenance. The parliamentary briefings that were organized by date of receipt rather than by subject, which meant that preparing for a debate required pulling from 5 different folders. The letter drafts that were kept separately from the sent copies, which made it impossible to track what had been said to whom without significant effort. She told him all of this with the precise attention of someone who had been observing it for 9 days and had been, without planning to, solving it. William listened with the focused attention he gave everything. When she finished he was quiet for a moment. How long would it take, he said, to implement all of it? 2 weeks, she said. Working in the mornings. The afternoons I'd need for the estate papers, those are more complex. And you'd want to do this. I'd find it satisfying, she said. Which is not the same thing, but it's close enough. She paused. I'm not proposing it as a way to earn my keep. I want to be clear about that. I'm proposing it because I have the skill and the time and it would make your operation significantly more efficient, and those seem like sufficient reasons. He looked at her. They are, he said. Entirely sufficient. She nodded. Picked up her book. Put it back down. William, she said. Yes. I'd like to be useful here, she said. Not as a guest. Not as someone waiting for a threat to resolve. Actually useful. She met his eyes. I'm good at this, at seeing systems and improving them. At organizing complicated things. At the kind of work that, she paused. At the kind of work that makes other work possible. He looked at her for a long moment. I know, he said. I haven't had a place to do it, she said. 4 years. Frederick didn't need it and the house on Grosvenor Street didn't require it, and I have spent a significant amount of time being underused, which is its own kind of, she stopped. Loneliness, he said quietly. She looked at him. Yes, she said. That's the right word. He held her gaze with the direct attention that had, she thought, never once wavered, not in the corridor, not in the library, not in any of the mornings and evenings that had accumulated into something neither of them had named yet. Then stay, he said. And be useful. And let the rest, a pause, careful and honest, let the rest arrive at its own pace. She looked at him. At the honest face. The steady gaze. The man who had crouched in a corridor and said the rest was not accidental and had meant every word of it. All right, she said. Simply that. It was, she thought, the most important word she had said in years. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. William read it at breakfast, twice, with the focused attention of a man processing something significant. Eleanor watched him over her coffee and waited. He set the letter down. "Carston first," he said. "Alderton has enough for a quiet conversation, the kind that produces resignations and retirements rather than public prosecutions. It will be handled without trial." "And Lyle?" "Lyle is more complicated." He looked at the letter again. "There's enough in Frederick's papers to end his public career. Alderton believes he'll negotiate, surrender the position, dissolve the relevant business interests, disappear from the parts of London where he's been operating." "That's not justice," Eleanor said. "No," William agreed. "It's the available version of it. Which is not the same thing and is sometimes the only thing." He met her eyes. "The third name, Harwick. The one Frederick documents most thoroughly. Alderton says that one will go to trial. There's no negotiating it, the evidence is too specific." Eleanor sat with this. She thought about Frederick's 43 pages, the meticulous record of a man who had understood he was building something for someone else to use. She thought about what he had seen, in his last 2 years, and what it had cost him to see it clearly enough to write it down. "It's enough," she said finally. Not happily. Honestly. "It's not everything, but it's enough." "Yes," William said. "I think so too." He paused. "There's one more thing." He set the letter on the table between them. "Alderton wants to speak with you. Directly. Your account of the men on Grosvenor Street, the ones who came to the house, it corroborates something in Frederick's papers that would otherwise be difficult to establish." She looked at the letter. "When?" she said. "When you're ready." "I'm ready now," she said. "I've been ready for 6 months. I was simply waiting for someone to ask." He looked at her across the breakfast table with the expression she had stopped trying to catalogue because it was always the same, steady, present, the look of a man who found her, in all her particular difficulty and precision and occasional inconvenience, entirely worth the attention. "I'll arrange it," he said. She picked up her coffee. "Good," she said. "Pass me the paper." He passed her the paper. The morning continued. It was Harriet who forced it. Not deliberately, or not entirely deliberately. She came to the house on a Saturday afternoon for no stated reason, which meant she had a specific reason she was choosing not to state, and she and Eleanor sat in the sitting room and talked about the reorganization project and the parliamentary briefings and the estate system, and Harriet listened and made useful observations and said nothing about any of the other things she was visibly thinking. Then she said, "William doesn't whistle." Eleanor looked up from the filing system she was explaining. "I beg your pardon?" "He doesn't whistle," Harriet said. "He never has. It's not a criticism, he's simply not the kind of man who goes about making incidental noise. He's very contained." She paused. "He's been whistling. Quietly, and he stops when he thinks someone can hear, but I've caught it twice this week." She met Eleanor's eyes. "I thought you should know." Eleanor looked at her. "Harriet," she said. "I'm not asking questions," Harriet said pleasantly. "I'm providing information. As a service. You're being extremely unsubtle." "I'm being exactly as subtle as the situation warrants, which is not very." She tilted her head. "You've been here 3 weeks. You've reorganized his entire filing system and he's let you, which he would not let anyone else do. You have breakfast together every morning and spend every evening in the library. He turned down the Pemberton dinner last week, which he has attended every year for 6 years." She paused. "I'm simply noting that the shape of things is fairly clear from the outside. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "It's complicated," she said. "Everything worth having is," Harriet said. "That's not an argument against it." She stood. "I like you, Eleanor. I liked you from the first afternoon. And I have been watching my cousin be very carefully alone for a long time, and I find I have strong feelings about that continuing when it doesn't need to." She gathered her coat and her bag with the brisk efficiency of a woman who has said the thing she came to say. At the door she paused. "The green dress suits you," she said. "I was right about that one." She left. Eleanor sat in the sitting room for a long moment. Then she went to find William. He was in the study, at his newly reorganized desk, with the parliamentary briefings that were now sorted by subject and therefore required half the preparation time. He looked up when she came in. She sat in the chair across from his desk, which was becoming her chair in the way that things became yours when you used them consistently enough. "Harriet came," she said. "I saw her carriage," he said. "Did she have opinions?" "Several." Eleanor looked at him across the desk. "William." "Yes. I want to say something," she said. "And I want to say it clearly, because I have spent 6 months in situations where nothing was said clearly and I find I no longer have patience for ambiguity." He set down the paper he was holding. Giving her his full attention, which was what he always did, which was one of the things she had stopped being surprised by. "3 weeks ago I dropped a tray in your corridor," she said. "Since then you have given me a safe place and genuine help and the first work that has used my actual mind in years, and you have done all of it without asking for anything in return and without making me feel like a problem being managed." She paused. "I want you to know that I see all of it. And that it matters." He looked at her steadily. "Eleanor." "I'm not finished," she said. "I also want you to say the other part. The part we've been not saying for 3 weeks, which has been, I've found it increasingly difficult to not say." The study was very quiet. "I told you," he said carefully, "that first morning in the garden, that some things are clear from the beginning. That the corridor was an accident but nothing after it was." "Yes. I meant it." "I know," she said. "I want to hear the rest of it." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood, which she had not expected, and came around the desk, and sat in the chair beside her rather than across from her, the chair no one used, that had accumulated a small stack of papers she had not yet reorganized, moving the papers to the floor with the particular decisiveness of a man who has decided to do a thing and is doing it. He was close enough that the careful distance she had been maintaining for 3 weeks was no longer operative. "I would like," he said, in the quiet steady voice that she had come to understand meant he was saying something he had thought about carefully, "for you to stay. Not as a guest. Not as someone who is here because the situation requires it." He met her eyes. "I would like you to stay because I want you here. Specifically. Permanently. In whatever form you are willing." He paused. "I'm aware that it has been 3 weeks. I'm aware that you are recently widowed and that the appropriate thing is patience, and I have patience. I will have as much of it as you need." Another pause. "But I want you to know what I'm being patient for. So that you can decide whether you want it too." Eleanor looked at him. At the honest face, the steady gaze. The man who whistled quietly and stopped when he thought he could be heard, who crouched in corridors and reorganized his mornings without comment, who said there she is in a library 3 weeks ago and had not since pretended he hadn't. "I do want it," she said. Quietly, with the full weight of having thought about it and meaning it and not being afraid of saying it. "I want it considerably more than is probably sensible for 3 weeks. 4, he said. Counting the corridor. She looked at him. 4, she agreed. He reached across and took her hand, the right hand, the one with the ring, and held it in both of his with the careful attention of a man handling something he intended to take very good care of. He looked at the ring. "You don't have to keep wearing it," he said. "Not a demand. Simply an offering, the permission to put it down, if she was ready, when she was ready." She looked at the ring. At the Voss seal. At the weight of it. "Not yet," she said. "But, soon, I think." "Whenever you're ready," he said. She looked at their hands. She thought about Frederick, about kindness and secrets and 43 pages that had finally done what they were written to do. About a man who had tried, at the end, in the only way available to him. "You should stop being angry at me." "I have," she thought. She turned her hand in William's and held on. "William," she said. "Yes. I would like," she said, "to stay." He looked at her with the contained warmth that was not contained at all, really, that had never been contained, that she had been watching escape its management for 4 weeks. "Good," he said, which was his word for the things that mattered most. She understood that now. She found she loved it. The trial of the third man, Harwick, the one Frederick had documented most thoroughly, began in the new year and lasted 3 weeks. Eleanor gave her account to Alderton on a grey November morning in a quiet Whitehall office, seated across from 2 men who listened with the focused attention of people who had been waiting for this information and understood its value. She told it clearly, in the organized sequence she had prepared: the men on Grosvenor Street, the papers, the 6 months, the locked box. She answered their questions precisely. She did not minimize and she did not embellish. When it was finished, one of the men looked at her across the table and said, "Mrs. Voss, your husband kept a remarkable record." "Yes," she said. "He did." "It will matter," the man said. "In court. And beyond." She nodded. She thought about Frederick. She thought about what it had cost him and what it had produced and what it meant that the record he kept in secret, at the end, out of fear and love and the particular late courage of a man who finally understood what he had been part of, what it meant that it would now matter, in a courtroom, on the record, in the official version of events. It will outlast him, she thought. The right thing, done at the last possible moment. It will outlast him. She came home to Ashworth House at noon. William was in the entrance hall, which was not where he usually was at noon, which meant he had been listening for her. She stood in the entrance hall and looked at him. "It's done," she said. He crossed the hall and put his arms around her, which was, she had not been expecting it, and it was warm, and steady, and the specific quality of an embrace from someone who is holding you because they want to and not because the situation requires it, and Eleanor stood in the entrance hall of Ashworth House and let herself be held, for the first time in longer than she could calculate, without the specific effort of holding herself together. She did not cry. But it was a near thing. "Come and have tea," he said, into her hair. "Yes," she said. They had tea. The ring. She took it off on a Sunday morning in December. Not dramatically, not with ceremony or decision announced in advance. She simply woke and lay in the winter light and knew, in the clear way that certain things become known, that she was ready. She worked it off her finger slowly, which took a moment because she had worn it for 3 years, and held it in her palm. It was heavy. She had forgotten, until it was off, how heavy it had been. She set it on the writing desk, not in a drawer, not hidden. Simply set it down, where it could be seen. It was Frederick's ring and it was part of her history, and her history was not something she intended to put away. She put on the green wool dress and went downstairs for breakfast. William looked up from the morning papers when she sat down. He looked at her right hand. He looked at her face. He poured her coffee and passed her the paper and said nothing, which was exactly right, which was what she loved about him, the specific intelligence of his silences, the things he understood without being told. "Thank you," she said anyway. He looked at her over the paper. "For the coffee?" "For all of it," she said. From the corridor. He held her gaze for a moment with the warmth that had long since stopped being contained. "Pass me the editorial section," he said. She passed him the editorial section. The morning continued. Eleanor. She married him in the spring. Not a large wedding, neither of them wanted a large wedding, which was one of the many things they had discovered they agreed on during the winter months of the Whenever You're Ready. A small church, the people who mattered, Harriet in a hat she had very strong opinions about. She wore blue. Not white. She had worn white once and it had been the right choice for that day, and this was a different day, a different woman, a different understanding of what she was walking toward. She walked toward it without hesitation. The work she had begun that autumn, reorganizing, systematizing, the particular application of a mind that had been underused for years, became, over time, something larger than either of them had initially named. William's operations were more efficient. His parliamentary preparation was more thorough. His correspondence was answered more accurately and his estate papers were cross-referenced in ways that had never been possible before. She also, quietly, began to do it for other people. Not officially, there was no official form for what she did. But women she knew, women in complicated situations with complicated households and complicated men, found their way to her. She organized things for them. She saw what they couldn't see because they were too close to it. She told them which details mattered and which didn't, and what questions to ask, and where the power in a situation actually lived. She charged for it eventually, which was Harriet's suggestion and William's enthusiastic endorsement and her own pragmatic conclusion. It was not a recognized profession. It was entirely hers. William. He continued to be, in most of the ways that mattered, exactly who he had been before Eleanor turned the corner of the east corridor with a tray in her hands. He was still contained, still methodical, still the man who moved slowly and arrived correctly. He still noticed things other people missed and did it quietly. He still had the particular patience of someone who understood that most things worth having required it. The difference was, and he was aware of it, examined it occasionally with the honest attention he applied to his own interior weather, that the house was no longer quiet in the way it had been. Not loud. He would not have tolerated loud. But, occupied. In the specific, warm way of a house that contains someone who fills it not with noise but with presence. With the sound of filing being reorganized and the smell of coffee at 7 in the morning and the particular quality of an evening in the library with another person who could be quiet without it being empty. He had not known he was missing this. He had known, in the abstract, that the house was large. He had not known it was lonely until it stopped being. He said this to Eleanor once, late in their first winter, in the library after dinner. She looked at him with the expression he had catalogued 100 times and still found, every time, exactly what he needed it to be. "I know," she said. "I was too." He took her hand. They sat in the library in the lamplight and were, simply, there. It was, he thought, sufficient. It was, he thought, everything. Frederick. His name appeared in 3 newspapers during the trial. Not prominently, he was a secondary figure, a man whose papers had provided corroborating evidence rather than the central testimony. But his name was there, in the printed record, connected to the truth he had written down in the last months of his life. Eleanor read the coverage carefully. She felt something, reading it, not grief, exactly, by then. Something more specific. The particular satisfaction of a record corrected. Of a man's last act being, finally, the thing it was meant to be. She set the paper down and thought about Frederick for a while. She thought about kindness and secrets and the locked box and the 43 pages written for someone else to use. About a man who had been limited in most ways and had, at the end, exceeded his limitations in the only direction that mattered. You should stop being angry at me. She had stopped. What remained was more complicated than anger and less heavy than grief, the specific weight of someone who mattered and was gone and had mattered in ways that were not simple and had gone in ways that were not simple, and whom she would think about, on certain mornings, for the rest of her life. She would let herself think about him. He deserved to be thought about. She put the paper in the fire, not the article, the rest of it, the ordinary daily news, and watched it catch, and went to find William. Harriet. Harriet was right about most things. She was right about the green dress. She was right about the whistling. She was right that Eleanor would stay, which she had known before Eleanor knew it herself, which Eleanor acknowledged only once, at Christmas dinner, surrounded by the people who had accumulated into their life. You were right, Eleanor said, over the soup. About which thing? Harriet said, without looking up from her own bowl. The green dress. Harriet looked up. She looked at Eleanor with the direct gaze that had been, from the first afternoon, entirely without performance. The green dress, she said. Yes. Among other things. William, across the table, appeared to be reading the menu card with unusual attention. Don't, Eleanor told him. I'm not doing anything, he said. You were about to say I told you so. I was absolutely not, he said. I would never. A pause. I might have thought it. Eleanor looked at him across the Christmas table, the honest face, the contained warmth that was not contained at all, the man who whistled quietly and crouched in corridors and said the rest was not accidental and had meant it. I know, she said. You're allowed. He smiled, fully, without management, the smile she had seen that first evening in the library and had thought, there it is. That's the real one. It still was. It always would be. The corridor. Ashworth House kept the east corridor. This was not remarkable, it was simply a corridor, as corridors are, a means of getting from one room to another. The floors were polished, the windows were east-facing, the light came through in the mornings in a particular way that Eleanor had always liked, from her first weeks in the house. She walked through it every day. Sometimes she thought about the drop tray and sometimes she didn't. The silver tray itself was back in its proper place, carrying correspondence as it had before, organized now by the system she had built and which worked considerably better than the old one. The correspondence arrived and was filed and was used and the house ran efficiently and well, and Eleanor walked through the east corridor in the mornings and felt, in it, the simple accumulated warmth of a life that had found, after a long and difficult time, the place where it was supposed to be. She had not been looking for it. She had been trying to survive. Which was, perhaps, she thought on a morning in the second spring, the light coming through the east windows, the house warm and occupied and hers, the only way any of the best things arrived. Not sought. Simply found, in the middle of something else entirely. The corridor. The dropped tray. The ring. The rest, not accidental. Never accidental. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. It truly means more than you know. If you're still here, tell me where you're listening from. Seeing your cities and countries genuinely makes this feel real and alive. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more. Your support keeps these stories coming.